September 2024, North Yorkshire. A police raid revealed more than just drugs. It uncovered a story of ambition, recklessness, and destruction. On a seized phone were thousands of messages, photos of cocaine stacked on scales, and digital trails pointing straight to Scarborough and Filey. At the center of it all were not hardened criminals, but two young men barely starting adulthood. Myles Coe, only 20, and Reece Gibson, 23, had turned their backs on ordinary life to run a cocaine network that spread through quiet coastal towns. This was no glamorous empire. It was a trade built on cutting agents, desperate customers, and the illusion of easy money. Yet, for a brief moment, they held real power, turning small communities into markets for their supply. How do teenagers and 20-somethings end up at the heart of a cocaine ring, leaving families and neighborhoods to deal with the fallout? This is the story of how police tore down their operation piece by piece. Scarborough and Filey, two names that evoke images of family holidays, fish and chips by the sea, and the timeless calm of North Yorkshire's coast. Tourists come for the beaches, the arcades, and the winding streets that feel untouched by time. To many, these towns are safe, quiet, and far removed from the chaos of big city crime. Yet beneath that postcard image, another reality was taking shape. Like so many coastal towns across Britain, Scarborough and Filey faced a silent struggle. Limited job opportunities, seasonal employment, and pockets of deprivation created the perfect environment for drugs to find a foothold. Cocaine, once thought of as a party drug for the wealthy, had seeped into ordinary communities. It was no longer confined to nightclubs or city centers. It was being sold and used in seaside towns where families lived side by side with addiction. The presence of drugs was not always obvious. To outsiders, the streets looked calm, but to those inside the community, whispers spread quickly. Who was dealing, who was using, and where the money was being made. Police officers, local services, and families all knew the damage cocaine was causing. Fights, debts, broken homes, and lost futures were its silent currency. Scarborough and Filey became more than holiday destinations. They became battlegrounds where young dealers saw opportunity and vulnerable people became targets. For some, the lure of fast cash and the illusion of status was irresistible. For others, the consequences were devastating. Behind the cheerful seafronts and tourist attractions, cocaine was changing lives forever. Myles Coe was just 20 years old when his name became tied to a cocaine network in North Yorkshire. Barely out of his teenage years, he should have been starting out in life with ordinary ambitions. College, work, maybe travel. Instead, he was navigating a different world, one where quick profit and fast living came with high risks. His age alone made the story striking. Inexperienced, but already committed to dealing one of the most destructive drugs in the country. At 23, Reece Gibson was only a few years older, old enough to know better, but still young enough to feel invincible. Together, Coe and Gibson found themselves working side by side in Scarborough and Filey, running a supply chain that stretched far beyond casual use. Police evidence later showed their involvement was not small-scale. It was structured, organized, and persistent. Customers knew their names. Messages linked them to regular deals. Images of cocaine on digital scales, stacks of cash, and coded exchanges painted a clear picture of their daily trade. But the story did not end with the two young men. Behind them was Rebecca Rhodes, 41 years old, more than twice Coe's age. Her role connected them to wider supply, providing access and experience they lacked. Rhodes acted as the bridge between youthful ambition and the hard reality of drug distribution. She wasn't just a background figure. Her involvement showed how older networks often draw in younger players, offering them the illusion of success while tightening control. The contrast was stark. Coe and Gibson were barely starting out in adult life. Rhodes had lived long enough to know the consequences. Yet together, they built a network that threatened to flood quiet towns with cocaine. The trio's partnership highlighted a troubling truth about the drug trade. it is not confined to stereotypical kingpins or distant cities. It can grow from the reckless ambition of young men, supported by older figures who understand the mechanics of supply. For Scarborough and Filey, the details of who they were mattered deeply. These weren't faceless criminals from elsewhere. They were recognizable names and familiar faces in a community that never expected to see such a network operating in plain sight. The fact that Coe was only 20 and Gibson just 23 made the case even more disturbing. How had two young men, still in the early years of adulthood, chosen a path that would not only cost them their freedom, but leave scars across entire towns? Their age became a symbol. It represented wasted potential, reckless choices, and the unsettling reality that crime can tempt the very young. By the time police gathered their overwhelming evidence, the image was clear. Three very different people bound together by cocaine, greed, and the promise of fast cash. Rebecca Rhodes was not the kind of figure many expected to find at the center of a cocaine supply chain. At 41, she stood apart from the two young men she worked with. Myles Coe was just 20, Reece Gibson only 23. The age gap was striking, but in the world of drugs, it made sense. Rhodes provided the experience, connections, and cover that Coe and Gibson lacked. She was the middle link, the one who tied street-level supply to a wider chain. Her role became more than just supportive. Police evidence revealed her direct involvement in coordinating deals and handling the flow of drugs. The age difference created a disturbing picture. While Coe and Gibson brought youthful ambition and recklessness, Rhodes brought stability and access. Together, the combination allowed their operation to grow beyond what either side could have managed alone. But it was Rhodes's phone that broke the case wide open. When police seized it, they didn't just find casual exchanges or vague hints. They uncovered a catalog of incriminating evidence, messages arranging deals, photos of cocaine being weighed, and contacts that mapped out the network. Every digital trace built a story that prosecutors could not ignore. It was the phone that turned suspicion into certainty, leaving Rhodes and her younger partners with no room to deny the scale of their involvement. The contrast in her role was powerful. She was old enough to understand the risks, old enough to see the consequences, yet still chose to stand beside men half her age in a trade that destroyed lives. To the court, her presence showed how drug supply doesn't operate on stereotypes. It isn't always shadowy strangers or distant figures. Sometimes it is people embedded in ordinary communities, people with history, families, and responsibilities, who still make choices that fuel addiction and crime. Rebecca Rhodes became the critical link, both in the operation itself and in its downfall. Without her phone, the evidence against Coe and Gibson might have taken longer to piece together. With it, the entire chain was exposed. In the end, her involvement proved that the cocaine trade in Scarborough and Filey wasn't driven only by youthful recklessness. It was reinforced by older hands who knew exactly how deep the damage could run. The turning point came in August 2024. Police had been watching the movements of Myles Coe, Reece Gibson, and Rebecca Rhodes for months, but it was Rhodes' arrest that unlocked the full scale of the operation. When officers took her into custody, they seized her mobile phone, a device that would prove more valuable than any street surveillance or informant testimony. Forensic analysis told the story in brutal detail. Hidden in plain sight were thousands of drug-related messages. Each one revealed how deeply Rhodes was involved in coordinating supply. Conversations with customers laid out orders, prices, and timings. Exchanges with Coe and Gibson showed how cocaine was moved, prepared, and sold across Scarborough and Filey. The evidence wasn't abstract or circumstantial. Photographs captured cocaine on digital scales, bagged and ready to sell. Other images showed cash, a symbol of the profits that tempted them into this trade. Investigators also uncovered signs of cutting agents being used, cheap powders mixed with cocaine to maximize profits while reducing purity. Every detail confirmed what police suspected. This was not a small, casual operation. It was a deliberate system designed for maximum gain. The messages revealed another unsettling truth. The customer base was wide, stretching across the community. Requests came regularly, showing how cocaine had moved beyond the fringes and into ordinary lives. The scale of demand made clear why young dealers like Coe and Gibson felt untouchable. With steady money flowing in, their network seemed unstoppable, until Rhodes' phone betrayed them. For detectives, the breakthrough was decisive. They no longer had to rely on assumptions or patchy intelligence. They had a digital map of the entire operation, from supply to sale. Each message, each photo, became a piece of a puzzle that prosecutors could present in court. The phone evidence was overwhelming, leaving little room for denial or defense. The irony was striking. For all the secrecy and coded language used by drug dealers, their downfall came from the very devices they depended on to run their trade. What had once been their tool of control became the chain of evidence that destroyed them. August 2024 marked the moment the case shifted from suspicion to certainty. From then on, it was no longer a question of if the trio would be convicted, but when. The police investigation into this Scarborough and Filey drug network was not a matter of chance. It was the result of careful observation, digital tracing, and mounting evidence that eventually left the three defendants with nowhere to hide. Officers began by monitoring unusual movements and communications linked to the group, piecing together the pattern of cocaine distribution in these quiet coastal towns. What they uncovered was not a one-off transaction, but an organized operation that moved significant quantities of drugs and cash with alarming efficiency. Reece Gibson, just 23 years old, played a central role in the network. To avoid detection, he changed mobile phone numbers repeatedly and used different aliases to disguise his identity. Each time the police came close, Gibson tried to stay one step ahead, but the trail of digital messages and intercepted data continued to grow. He was not acting alone. His methods included sharing customers with others in the network, ensuring that supply lines remained open even if one part of the operation was compromised. This adaptability made the group harder to dismantle, but also provided investigators with multiple threads to pull on. At the heart of the supply line stood 20-year-old Myles Coe. Unlike Gibson, whose role involved constant movement and concealment, Coe was trusted to provide large quantities of cocaine to the operation. His youth contrasted sharply with the scale of his responsibility. The evidence suggested he had access to bulk amounts of the drug, which he distributed further down the chain. From there, the operation split into smaller sales, increasing profits but also spreading the drug deeper into local communities. Rebecca Rhodes, the oldest of the trio at 41, worked alongside Gibson to maximize profits by cutting the drugs before resale. This process stretched the supply further and boosted returns, but it also increased risks for users. The combination of Coe's wholesale role, Gibson's customer network, and Rhodes' hands-on involvement in preparing the product formed a structure that resembled a miniature cartel, embedded not in a city, but in the streets of Scarborough and Filey. For the police, the key was evidence. Each step of the investigation gathered proof that could stand in court. They seized cash, often in significant amounts, hidden among personal belongings or stashed away with the drugs. Photographs, messages, and digital records painted a clear picture of the operation. There were images of cocaine, bundles of cash, and conversations between the defendants that left little room for doubt. Every exhibit added weight to the case. Every seized note and incriminating image built a story of organized supply that reached far beyond the excuses the defendants might later attempt. The investigation was methodical, stripping away the layers of secrecy the group thought would protect them. By the time officers brought charges, the evidence was overwhelming. The image that emerged was not of chance dealers making reckless decisions, but of a coordinated effort to flood small coastal communities with cocaine. And while each of the three defendants had their own role, together they formed a chain that was both profitable and damaging. The police had dismantled that chain link by link, ensuring that when the case reached court, there would be no gaps for doubt or denial. On September 4th, inside York Crown Court, the final act of the Scarborough and Filey cocaine case unfolded. After months of investigation and preparation, the evidence that had been collected was laid bare in front of the court. Each of the three defendants now faced the consequences of choices that had once promised easy money, but had instead led to a permanent stain on their futures. For Myles Allen Coe, the youngest of the group at only 20 years old, the sentence was stark. He was handed 5 years in a young offenders institute. The court made it clear that his role in supplying significant amounts of cocaine was not a mistake that could be brushed aside. Despite his youth, his involvement was central, and the punishment reflected the seriousness of the crime. What might have felt like a quick way to make money had now turned into years of confinement, cutting short a life barely begun. Reece Gibson, just 3 years older at 23, also faced the consequences of his actions. His attempts to stay ahead of police by switching phones and using aliases had failed in the end. The overwhelming evidence secured his downfall, and the court sentenced him to 2 years and 4 months in prison. Shorter than Coe's sentence, but still a sharp reality check for someone who had imagined himself untouchable. Rebecca Rhodes, the 41-year-old who had worked alongside Gibson to cut and prepare the cocaine for sale, stood in court, knowing the walls were closing in. Unlike Coe and Gibson, she did not yet have her sentence confirmed. Her fate was left hanging, a reminder that the law would not overlook her role in stretching the supply for maximum profit. Even without a final decision that day, the weight of evidence made the outcome inevitable. In court, the tone was not one of surprise. The guilty pleas showed that each defendant understood the strength of the case against them. There was no way to argue against the photographs, the messages, the seized cash. What once had been hidden in shadows was now exposed in the harsh light of the courtroom. The sentencing marked the end of a case that had disrupted quiet coastal towns with the trade of cocaine. It showed how ambition, greed, and recklessness can unravel lives, leaving prison sentences in place of profit and damaged communities in place of quick gains. When the case reached its conclusion, the police made it clear that this was not just about 3 people caught with cocaine. Detective Constable Sam Rivers, who worked on the investigation, described drug supply as a scourge on communities. His words carried weight because they reflected more than just one case. Behind every bag of cocaine lies a chain of crime, from violence and debt to exploitation and fear. Rivers explained that the business of selling drugs never exists in isolation. It draws in others, whether as couriers, debt collectors, or rival dealers fighting for control. Even in small towns like Scarborough and Filey, the same destructive patterns appear. Cocaine money may look glamorous on the surface, but it fuels misery on the ground. Families are torn apart. Addicts are left struggling. Neighborhoods suffer from the ripple effects of crime that surround the trade. This investigation highlighted that point in sharp detail. The seized messages and images showed not only sales, but also the scale of ambition. Coe, Gibson, and Rhodes wanted to carve out their share of the market, even if it meant flooding quiet coastal towns with drugs. The court sentences put an end to their operation, but they also served as a warning of how far the problem reaches. For the community, the impact was stark. Residents who had long seen Scarborough and Filey as safe places now had proof that organized drug supply was closer than they imagined. Cocaine wasn't just an issue for big cities. It was being weighed, cut, and sold in their own backyard. That realization carried a sense of betrayal, as if the innocence of small-town life had been broken. Rivers stressed that tackling drug supply is about more than arrests. It is about protecting vulnerable people and sending a clear message. Those who profit from misery will face consequences. His statement was both a warning and a reassurance. The police were watching, the courts were acting, and the fight against drug crime was ongoing. This case became a reminder that the battle against cocaine supply is not abstract. It plays out in real streets, real homes, and in the lives of people who never asked to be caught in the middle. For Scarborough and Filey, the sentencing marked both an ending and a beginning. The end of one operation, and the ongoing challenge of keeping small towns safe from the reach of drug crime. Two young men from coastal towns, barely out of their teens, found themselves at the center of a cocaine supply chain. Their choices reflect a bigger issue that small communities continue to face. The promise of fast money can be tempting, especially when the risks seem distant and the rewards immediate. But behind every deal is a cost that spreads far beyond the dealers themselves. In places like Scarborough and Filey, the cycle is always the same. Drugs arrive, money changes hands, and the damage ripples outward. Families are broken, addictions deepen, communities lose their sense of safety. For Coe and Gibson, what began as an opportunity to climb quickly ended in courtrooms and prison cells. Their story is not just about crime and punishment. It is about how the lure of easy money can consume lives and leave behind nothing but wreckage. The story of Myles Coe, Reece Gibson, and Rebecca Rhodes is more than a tale of arrests and sentencing. It is a stark reminder of how drug crime can seep into the most unexpected places. Two young men from coastal towns, driven by ambition and the promise of quick money, found themselves dismantled by the very system they thought they could outsmart. An older accomplice, acting as the middle link, only deepened the web of crime. Together they turned quiet communities into markets for misery. From the very beginning, one question hung in the air. How far can ambition stretch before the law catches up? In this case, the answer was clear. The evidence was overwhelming. The convictions were decisive. Yet while this chapter has closed, the larger story remains unresolved. For every operation shut down, another emerges. For every dealer sentenced, another steps forward. Law enforcement scored a victory in Scarborough and Filey, but the war on drugs is far from over. The real lesson is not only in the prison terms handed down, but in the damage already left behind. Families scarred, communities unsettled, lives altered beyond repair. Each conviction may be a win, but the battle continues. And the question we must all ask is this: how many more stories like this will small towns have to endure before the cycle finally breaks?